preparation for Game 5, while the Grizzlies are certainly focused on regrouping and returning to form, Ja Morant is recognized as the NBA's most improved player. And while you may make a case that others were more deserving, at the end of the day, it's great recognition for a job well done, but a job that is not done this year so far for Ja and the Grizzlies. That and much more on this edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Let's get it going.
Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome to the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. Certainly hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, technical difficulties again, but by the magic of myself, whoa! There we go. Somebody's going to wake up and be excited with that yell, Damichael Cole, and I am excited that means that they were listening. Damichael Cole, how are you doing this morning, sir?
I'm doing great, Shawn. It's a great day, and it's game day. Get hype. It's game day. It's a big game. Game 5 is the ultimate swing game, and it's time to talk about it.
It absolutely is, and we're going to talk all about it. Of course, you can find myself at StatsSAC. Damichael Cole, Dad, burn it. Damichael Cole at Damichael C on Twitter. Obviously, Damichael with the commercial appeal. Myself with Grizzly Bear Blues. And obviously, you can find the podcast wherever it's available, as well as at Locked On Grizz on Twitter. But Damichael, before we get into Game 5, Monday was a more fun day than we anticipated it would be, as it was announced that Ja Morant was named the 2021-2022 NBA's most improved player. Now, the story of the day is the fact that the award itself is no longer in Ja Morant's possession. It's in the possession of Desmond Bane. But I know that you had a very busy day yesterday covering practice and, of course, the news as well. When the news broke, Damichael, what were your thoughts about, an award that we've seen kind of be polarizing, kind of be debated, but hey, at the end of the day, Ja Morant won an award I think he deserved.
Yeah, he won the award. We can debate, how much he deserved it and all of that. It's tough to say because when you think most improved, for the most part, a lot of people like to think of those players like Pascal Siakam. That was a legit most improved type guy who kind of went from the D League to all-star caliber player on a championship team. Players like that. But Ja's rise is different than any most improved player we have ever seen before. This is a guy who was voted by, the media as the best rookie 2 seasons ago. 2 seasons ago, he's the best player in his rookie class. Then last season, he beat Golden State, as Draymond Green pointed out. He beat Stephen Curry and Draymond Green in a play-in game. And then this year, the Grizzlies take this massive jump. So he deserves, to be in that most improved conversation. But I think a lot of people are having, trouble grasping it because this isn't the type of player who usually wins most improved. Ja Morant is, in the conversation for one of the top 5 point guards in the NBA. He was in the conversation for first team All-NBA most of the season until, the injuries came around. But he's probably going to make second team All-NBA. And he just won most improved. It's a little weird looking. It's not your traditional way of this award being won. I know people pointed to a guy like Jordan Poole. That's a guy who we saw have to go to the G League and work on some things last season and work his way into this role. Or DeJounte Murray, who has been a great defender for a long time now. First team all defense a couple seasons ago, but he worked and became this all-around offensive guy from scoring and passing threat. Ja's rise is a little different, Shawn, but like you said, deserved, because at the end of the day, he took some substantial jumps from the player he was last season. It's hard for people to grasp that because he was a playoff player last season. So the only way he could have won most improved was doing what he did, becoming an MVP candidate.
Absolutely. And there's many different ways you can look at it. I think one way that you certainly brought up is that you're right. You typically don't see a most improved player have the type of playoff performance that Ja did the previous season and then had the performance he did last year. You typically don't see that track record. But one thing I will say that you do see, Ja Morant follows in the footsteps of a player that you've seen over the past 10 years win most improved player. 8 or 9 out of the past 10 winners have been the player that emerged among the all NBA top 15 or 20 players in the league in that specific year for the first time in his career. Ja Morant fits that bill this season. So, yes, I think you can make a case for others who have taken a more statistical leap. Yes, I could certainly understand if you might think that Ja is above this award. But with how much the Grizzlies have improved as a team and with the overall track record and trends that we see with voting, Ja Morant fits the bill. And the one thing that I don't want to take away from Damichael is just how significant of a leap he has made. Coming into this year, the thoughts were, a good season for Ja is a clear all-star. Now he is clearly a top 15 player in the league and a first or second team All-NBA player. That is a significant jump above what many expected.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, right? You're the simplest way. It's the most improved player taking that jump from one season to the next. I think it's just historically people like it, like for it to be players who have come, from started in much smaller places than Ja. Ja walked into the league as, billed as one of the future, stars of the league, and he's lived up to that. And he got here fast, but I think that's the problem where most people say a guy like Jordan Poole, they didn't see this coming. Even Desmond Bane, Desmond Bane finished 5th in most improved player voting. He was a guy who came off the bench last season, mostly viewed as a spot up shooter, took a really big jump. So I think most people think of players like that, not a guy who was a top 2 pick in his draft and was this heralded guy out of Murray State like Ja Morant was. So that, I think, the difficulty I've seen, from everyone accepting what this is. But Shawn, you put it, I mean, how it is in the simplest form. Ja Morant went from 19 points to 27.4 points per game. He went from deemed, one of the future players of this league to one of the now players of this league.
Absolutely. And the other thing, though, as Ja has pointed out all season, and that, he even pointed out while we were enjoying his comments in the award press conference yesterday, one of the things that also stood out is that the Grizzlies had 3 of the top vote getters. 3 Grizzlies were listed among the top vote getters for most improved player. Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Ja Morant. And of course, there's the first narrative of just this once again being the latest proof of how bright the Grizzlies' future is. But Damichael, I think another narrative that certainly comes from this is the fact that all 3 players were on the most improved list. It's because of how good each of the players' games and how their games have broke out this year, how they complement each other. Ja's ability to get into the lane has opened up the ability to shoot for Desmond Bane, and he's taken advantage of it. Jaren Jackson Jr. being able to focus on defense because he knows the offense is taken care of. That's what's helped him break him out. And then him getting the defensive activity to get the Grizzlies on the run, that plays right into Ja and Desmond's game. I think that with all 3 of these players on the most improved list, it's a great illustration of not only how much they've all improved, but how much their games complementing each other has helped each player improve.
Exactly. Exactly. And I actually just wrote a story, about that yesterday in terms of Ja Morant and Desmond Bane. Games are very complimentary. As we've seen, we're going to get more into the game coverage, but just real quick, like game 1 and game 2, Ja Morant scored 32 and 23 points because, more of the attention was focused on shutting down Grizzlies shooters, mainly Desmond Bane. So he had a slower start to the series. Then they decided to pack the paint against Ja Morant. He slows down. Desmond Bane hit 7 3-pointers in back-to-back games. They complement each other well. They both improved a lot. And then you mentioned Jaren Jackson Jr. Of course, throughout this season, Shawn, you've said the numbers over and over again about how the way he plays kind of, dictates a lot of things from a winning perspective for this team. And yeah, that's crazy to me. They have 3 guys who were voted, in the top 10 of the most improved player race. And not only that, all these guys are in their 4th season are younger. These are young guys, 22, 23 years old. The future is now, but it's still bright.
Absolutely. And while at the end of the day, I can only speak for myself, and I've said all along that whatever happens in the playoffs, I still think the most significant thing from this season is the fact of how much this trio has improved together because they're playing with each other. At the end of the day, we will have plenty of time to talk about the future, but the significant time is now. And in game 5, the significance of the Grizzlies turning around and once again taking the control of the series, it falls on the shoulders of Jaren Jackson Jr. We'll discuss that in just a moment. But before we do, want to talk with you a bit about Prize Picks. And I can tell you this, Jaren Jackson Jr. probably was one of the more fun folks to use when it came to Prize Picks. Prize Picks is a great opportunity. You pick 2 to 5 players with an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry, and it's just you versus the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. It's safe and offers fast withdrawals. It's a great opportunity for you to be able to make the most of your opportunity to be able to cash off of your knowledge. PrizePicks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our users. Users get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point, but you must use promo code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On fans. Sign up today and use promo code NBA, $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point. So I'm telling you this, Damichael, I know that we have plenty to talk about when it comes to the Grizzlies and the NBA playoffs. There's a lot of fun also out there. If you're a Memphis Tiger fan, Calvin Austin may finally get his deserved due getting drafted this weekend as the NFL draft is upon us. And as you, a Locked On listener, you have all the coverage that you need. Your favorite Locked On college podcast, Locked On NFL podcast will have all the coverage when it comes to the 2022 NFL draft. Make it your second listen of the day after your first listen of the day. So, Damichael, me and you talked about coming into the playoffs that the biggest X factor for the Grizzlies was going to be Jaren Jackson Jr. We've got in small spurts why that absolutely is. And Peter Edmonston, who was the first, for those who may not know, Peter Edmonston, Sports 56, him and Anthony Sane make a wonderful duo on their radio show over at Sports 56. Peter Edmonston was the first ever host of Locked On Grizzlies. He brought up a very, very fun stat today. When Jaren Jackson Jr. has been on the court, Minnesota is shooting 38% from the field and 35% from three. When he is off the court, Minnesota is shooting 49% from the field and 41% from three. The whole point of it is this, Damichael. Yes, you can critique him staying on the court. Yes, he needs to provide more offense, which we'll get to in just a second. But Jaren Jackson Jr. still is making a true impact when he's on the court. He just needs to be on there more often with his defense.
He just needs to be on there more often. And you said it. And even if you just look at this series, the 2 games, I mean, I said yesterday jokingly to someone, I said, he has to get to 28 minutes. 28 minutes. They'll win. And I didn't even know the numbers of the first 4 games. And then someone relayed the message to me that actually, Damichael, the 2 games where he's played around 26, 27 minutes, they've won. When he's played less, they've lost. So I said 28 just off the top of my head, thinking that's a great number for him. And I mean, right around that mark is the games where the Grizzlies have won in this series. And he's been in foul trouble in every game, but the games he's been able to manage it a little bit better. He's been able to play a little bit longer. They've won. So imagine if they get him for 31, 32 minutes. I mean, he's so important. You look at the things, that the Timberwolves have done well in this series. The 3-point shooting, Karl Anthony Towns just getting downhill and just being a big bully. Both of those areas are areas where Jaren Jackson Jr., his ability to switch out onto the perimeter against those shooters and switching kind of helps the Grizzlies eliminate some of that dribble drive penetration where the Timberwolves are just kicking it out to these shooters and getting good looks. Having a guy who's switchable like Jaren Jackson Jr. in the game helps out in those situations. What about Karl Anthony Towns coming down here? We've seen, he's been matched up one-on-one against Karl Anthony Towns some, but we saw Kyle Anderson matched up against him a lot. We saw Xavier Tillman matched up with him a lot. We saw Brandon Clark matched up with him a lot. The reason is, I think, because Taylor Jenkins likes to have Jaren Jackson Jr. behind those guys as kind of a protector when Karl Anthony Towns is coming to the rim. Think back to, the Clippers and their strategy. The Clippers had a guy like Hartenstein behind Nicholas Batum, who they started him on, because when Karl Anthony Towns would be able to strongman his way to the rim and, try to get an easy layup, here comes a 7-foot Hartenstein, just like here comes a 6'11" Jaren Jackson Jr. So, Shawn, you can't understate his importance in this series. I mean, he's been consistently inconsistent for a large part of this year, but this is the time, Shawn. They need him to step it up and be the guy who they paid that extension money to.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you another big reason why he needs to step up. It's not just about him, but it's about, what you may not know what to expect and what you could possibly expect in Game 5 when it comes to the Grizzlies' other two of their big three. With Ja Morant, you're hoping that he's back to 100%, though it's still a work in progress, obviously. What are you going to get from him? You obviously know he struggles against the Timberwolves compared to other teams. You also know, and I really think this is going to be a narrative of Game 5, the Timberwolves are likely going to pay more attention to Desmond Bane with how much he's torched them over the past 2 games. So naturally, who is the player that you're going to look at to step up? It's going to be Jaren Jackson Jr. And the one game that he did step up into, Michael, they kicked the Timberwolves' butts. They kicked their butts by 28 points. So we see when he's a force on offense, force on defense, the difference he can make. But 37% from the field, 31% from 3, he's going to have to find some way to get into a groove. And to your point, the way that he does that is staying on the court early to find that rhythm.
Yeah, you just set the shooting numbers, and I mean, he's 6'11". You don't supposed to have those shooting numbers at 6'11", especially, with the just physical gift that Jaren Jackson has. He can shoot, he can take you off the dribble, and he can finish. He has too much skill to be struggling, the way he is at the end of the day on offense. And a big part of this too, I think he has to clean up the offensive fouls. So we talked to him before we left Minnesota. Had a shoot around before Game 4. Jaren Jackson Jr. was one of the players we got to talk to, and just talking to him, I asked him, about the fouls. I asked him basically, how do you, limit them? Like what is the biggest thing that stood out to him? Then he talked about his hands, keeping his hands active, keeping his hands, out of the cookie jar in good situations. And then he brought up another good point that we haven't really even touched on a lot. The Timberwolves are a good charge-taking team. We have seen Jaren Jackson Jr. have a number of offensive fouls, and it was kind of telling in a way. He mentioned that before the game, and I believe, Shawn, he fouled out on an offensive foul. Now, we can debate whether it was a foul or not, but he fouled out of that game on an offensive foul as well. So, it's the offensive fouls just as much as the defensive fouls. He talked about how they're very good in getting in position. He's going to have to, think before he makes certain moves because they're usually trying to be a step ahead of you. They're guessing to the right spots and things like that. That's a big part of it for him too. If he can take away the offensive fouls, he'll have more room to play, on the defensive end.
Absolutely. And I am a staunch Jaren Jackson Jr. supporter. I will back all day that he is having a great series defensively when he's on the court. But one thing that I do think is true, and Desmond Bane talked about it, he talked about the fact that all of the Grizzlies, they've talked with Jaren Jackson Jr., they know that obviously he's working as hard as he can to have a great game, how big of a chance it is for him, how much it's needed tomorrow night, and how much he wants to deliver. Jaren Jackson Jr., the next step of his game is figuring out that even when the foul trouble is there, even when the rhythm may not be there early, letting things go and just staying in the moment, trusting his talent, and letting it ride. And that's exactly what he did all year on defense. Look at the results. Now, if he can find that groove on offense, it certainly will be a great thing to see. But it's not just Jaren's performance that's going to really define Game 5. There's a few other areas where the Grizzlies are going to have to perform well, and we'll discuss that in just a moment. But before we do, Damichael, I want to talk with you a bit about BetOnline.net. Now, I'll be honest with you. The odds of all these playoff series have certainly been tough to gouge because every single night it seems like like something unexpected happens, whether you want to blame it on conspiracy theories or just teams being more evenly matched than we thought, betonline.net is the best place for you to go to be able to get all your sports action, whether it be boxing, UFC, NBA playoffs, baseball. Don't bet on the Braves right now. Damichael, calm down. I know that makes you emotional when we talk about the Braves. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Leave it alone, Shawn. Leave it alone.
Regardless of whatever sport you choose to bet and wager on, betonline.net is the place for you to go. The fastest and easiest way for you to bet on all your sports action. Check out betonline.net today. Obviously, it's going to be an exciting night at the FedEx Forum, and on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, we're going to have plenty to break down when it comes to Game 5. It's going to be, there's a wide variety of different things we can talk about, but the tone is certainly going to be either jovial with the fact that we've got one more game to win or trying to figure out how we're going to win 2 games in a row. That on tomorrow's edition of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. So, Damichael, I've got a couple of things that I want to bring up about tonight's game, but I want to give you the floor first. If you were to rank the top 2 things that you want to see the Grizzlies come out and do to set the tone for Game 5, what would they be?
Number 1, above any and everything, is Karl Anthony Towns. You have to do something there. You can't let him get to the free throw line at will, which means if you just have to put yourself in a better defensive position when he's just, boiling over dudes, and make the referees call that offensive foul instead of him, attempting so many free throws. And it's also just, matchup wise, if you got to double him, double him. I mean, if you do what you have to do, that is the key to the series so far. The 2 games that the Grizzlies have won, Karl Anthony Towns combined for 23 points. In the 2 games they've lost, he scored 29, he scored 33. There it is. Karl Anthony Towns is number 1 above anything. And I think number 2 for me is getting Ja Morant going. And here's where I am. I did mention earlier the complimentary play with him and Desmond Bane, and I talked to Desmond Bane about it yesterday too. He basically said, if they pack the paint and try to stop Ja Morant, that's fine. It gives him shots, and that's what it's done. 7 3-pointers, each of the last. He joins Klay Thompson and Steph Curry, only players in playoff history. Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, Desmond Bane to make 7 3-pointers in back-to-back playoff games. That's the company he's in. Taylor Jenkins, Desmond Bane, they all talked about how this team is slowing down Ja Morant. I even talked about it. Every time he drives the ball to the paint, Shawn, he's seeing multiple bodies. And Taylor Jenkins went as far to say, look, they're putting 5 bodies in the paint. They are packing the paint. They're saying, look, we know he's the top paint scorer in the NBA. We know this is the top paint scoring team in the NBA. They're not going to beat us that easily. That's what they're saying. They're not letting Ja Morant score in the paint. But something else I noticed about Ja Morant's number? Yeah, okay, he shoots 7 of 17 in the paint, not his typical, 60-plus field goal percentage inside the restricted area. But the problem is Ja Morant hasn't taken a mid-range jumper this series. They're taking away your three-pointer. They're taking it by, blitzing him, trapping him, all of those things. And they also, there are 3-4 bodies in the paint every time he drives the ball. That mid-range jumper is there. Ja Morant has not taken a mid-range jumper from the left, from the right, from the center part of the mid-range area, and everywhere in between. He has not taken one mid-range jumper. That could be the key to unlocking some things for him, but Ja Morant has to get going as well, Shawn.
Absolutely. And you bring up a great point about Ja Morant. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I will say from the film that it does seem like when Ja Morant gets one of his scoring grooves going, it's mixing in, getting into the lane along with a few mid-range jumpers. So certainly seeing that will be huge. I've stated it over the past 2 days, Damichael. The big thing for me is the three-point awareness. What are the Grizzlies going to do in order to stop the three? The 2 things that have stood out in the Grizzlies or in the Timberwolves' 2 victories, balancing out the overall impact of Karl Anthony Towns, as you mentioned, but also they made 16 threes in game 1. They made 18 threes in game 2. The Grizzlies are going to have to do a better job closing out and distracting the Timberwolves when it comes to shooting the threes. Now, that's more defensive rotations, better scrambling, but we've seen them do it. They did it so effectively in game 2. They did it effectively to come back in game 3. They certainly can do it. That's on the defensive side. On the offensive side, for me, where are your other 3-point sources going to come from, especially if the Timberwolves do find a way to make Desmond Bane regress a bit? Is it going to be Dylan? Is it going to be Jaren? Is Ja going to be able to find his shot? And I'll tell you this, I don't know if I'll go as far as make it a guarantee. I think that at least if it's a small stretch, DeAnthony Melton is going to do something significant in this game. Because if DeAnthony Melton can get going, it's a double whammy for the Minnesota Timberwolves. His ability with shooting surges to really support what the Grizzlies do from the 3-point line, that would be huge in Game 5. And also his ability to create chaos and turnovers versus a team like Minnesota who's struggled so far this series in that department, he would be huge. So an unexpected contribution from DeAnthony Melton will go a long way as well. But 3-point offense, 3-point defense, and to your point, how do they guard Karl Anthony Towns is my huge news to watch.
Yeah, and we both got that Karl Anthony Towns point because it's just listening to him talk after Game 4. He talked about just basically I'm going to paraphrase here because they asked him like what was the difference, and he basically just made up in his mind he didn't care if they were going to triple team him, double team him, quadruple team him. He was not going to be passive like he was in Game 3. It was that simple. So you hear those comments. Some people get scared, like, oh, man, he's going to be really aggressive. Use that aggressiveness against him if you're the Grizzlies. Taylor Jenkins should be licking his lips. Okay, he wants to be that aggressive. All we have to do is let's build a wall here, and boom, offense foul. He's going to go out of the game. We know he fouled. He's very foul prone on both ends of the floor. That's how you you at least try to limit him. But Karl Anthony Towns, he's a tough test. And Anthony Edwards has been really good. Inconsistent, at times he's been battling, the injury and things like that. And D'Angelo Russell has just been real inconsistent as well. And, Malik Beasley has had his moments, but Karl Anthony Towns is the one guy I think who's capable at any moment of taking over. You have to stop him. And I know, Shawn, you've harped on the 3-point shooting all series long, even before the series. You were on top of it, Shawn. You were on top of that 3-point shooting. And it's a huge factor, when they came in here in Game 1, when they came to Memphis for Game 1, they doubled the Grizzlies. They made 16 3-pointers. The Grizzlies made 7. That's how they won in Memphis once. Another thing we haven't hit on, Shawn, Desmond Bane shooting at home and road that's been 2 completely different players throughout this season. I don't know how to explain it. I've asked Desmond Bane probably 3 or 4 times, and he doesn't really have a real reason. He talks about going on the road and, feeding off of the crowd, but he doesn't have like a legitimate reason that he's at least told us as to why his road home splits are so different. And what we saw in this series so far, on the road, he made 7 3-pointers in both road games. His home games, he struggled a little bit more. So that's another factor. Desmond Bane is shooting 48% from 3 on the road this year. If he can, duplicate those road splits at home, then, that helps out a lot. But we haven't seen Desmond Bane shoot the ball at home the way he has on the road for some reason, Shawn.
It's going to be a huge factor. Again, in Game 1, the Timberwolves had 16 threes to the Grizzlies 7. Since then, the Timberwolves have 41 threes to the Grizzlies 40. And one other thing that stands out in this, unfortunately, we have to talk about it, but it's been such an obvious trend that it's got to be there.
Yeah.
The Grizzlies must make free throws. We talk about Game 4, how egregious the foul calls were, how the reffing was. But in this series, the Grizzlies have 13 more free throw attempts than the Timberwolves. They've got 1 more made free throw.
Wow.
Damichael, how many points did they lose Game 4 by?
They lost by 1. 1 point.
Mm-hmm. So it's not only making threes. If you want to overcome the foul calling not working out your way, and it's been both teams who have experienced it, make your free throws. Make your free throws as well. But, of course, the one big thing that we haven't gotten to is Mr. Patrick Beverley's comments about Taylor Jenkins on Monday after Game 4, discussing how a young coach should not make these comments and things like that. And I get it. That's Pat Bev. That's Pat Bev being Pat Bev. For whatever you want to think about it, it has value. It has its role. But I'm very interested to see Ja Morant coming out, knowing that Pat Bev's been talking, I'm very interested to see how Ja Morant's going to approach it. And if these things can work out, I'll be very interested to see what Patrick Beverley has to say, regardless of the result, over the next 2 days. But I especially would love to hear what he would have to say if Ja Morant can have another 25-10 night, which I think he's capable of. Damichael, it's going to be a lot of fun. I look forward to seeing you there. And I also hope that you have a great day. And hey, you know what? Hopefully we're going to have a win to talk about tomorrow. For Damichael Cole, my name's Shawn Coleman. Damichael, you have a great Tuesday, by the way.
You have a great Tuesday as well, Shawn. Looking forward to whatever the talking point is after this game. It's going to be really interesting. Like you said, it's going to be real jovial, or it's going to be some scared people in Memphis, Tennessee.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, we are certainly supporting the team. They know they've been here before. They know what it's like. They're very resilient. They also know that if they play their style of ball, they're going to like the results. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Locked On Grizzlies podcast.